So go ahead and get started. Thank you for starting the recording. I just want to ask people to please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, and cameras are optional. Please, turn them on if you'd like, turn them off if you would like, and we will go ahead and get started. So I just want to welcome everyone to the Seeds of Hope Lessons Learned from People in Recovery and Parents of Children with Substance Use Disorder. This event is offered by Building Bright Futures in collaboration with the Vermont Department of Health and the City of Burlington Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. I'm Kristen Cameron. I'm a substance misuse prevention consultant with the Health Department, and my co-hosts and fellow event planners here today are Ollie Ding, the Regional Manager for Chittenden, Franklin, and Grand Isle, and Central Vermont with Building Bright Futures, and Scott Pavic, the Substance Use Policy Analyst for the City of Burlington. The panelists will introduce themselves in a few minutes. And we invite you, the audience, to introduce yourself to each other in the chat as we get started. So first and foremost, we're going to hear opening remarks from Dr. Morgan Crossman. Dr. Crossman is the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures, Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council, and Executive Director of Vermont's Early Childhood Data and Policy Center. In this role, Dr. Crossman is responsible for leading the vision and strategic planning of Vermont's early childhood system, serving as the primary advisor to the governor and legislature on the well-being of children from prenatal to age 8 and their families, and leading the state in using evidence and data to inform early childhood policy and service provision. Dr. Crossman also holds a faculty appointment at the University of Vermont in the Department of Education and is the mother of a 5-year-old rising kindergartner in Heinsberg, Vermont. Dr. Crossman?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm Morgan Crossman, and as Kristen said, I have a really exciting role, and I'm honored to support Vermont in thinking about early childhood policy and how we're supporting the needs of kids and families across the prenatal period through age 8. And as she mentioned, I am the mom of a very fierce 5-year-old that's entering kindergarten. So I'm really excited to see her leadership and cultivate that over time. And I also have somewhat of a personal connection to substance abuse disorder and serve as a really concrete support system to a lifelong best friend who is celebrating 12 years of sobriety this year. It's been really important for me to learn from her journey, specifically in seeing how substance abuse disorder was generational and took a really big impact on multiple generations of her family, how it really impacted her development and her childhood, and how it's really shaping the parent and how she's showing up for her kids today. And it's also been really inspiring to see how she's chosen to support her family in addition to herself. So she's broken her own cycle of addiction and really supported her parents in initial steps to their own recovery, which is just such a challenging and powerful way to think about her own recovery. And then also has then sought out additional training as a mental health clinician to then go on and support other individuals and thinking about what this means and how she's thinking about recovery for other youth individuals experiencing substance abuse disorder in her own community and in another state. So I'm really excited to learn from all of you here today and to welcome you to this Seed of Hope event. And I want to take just a quick minute to thank the Vermont Department of Health and the City of Burlington specifically for planning this event, and really importantly for all of the individuals, the family members, for sharing your stories. It's so critical for us to be able to learn from each other. And I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being brave and being willing to share your experience. And to raise awareness of how we need to be thinking about the needs and challenges that kids and families are facing across the state of Vermont right now. So thank you. I also want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the role of Building Bright Futures in the system and to allow folks to understand how we are approaching this work. So in the state of Vermont, Building Bright Futures serves as a public and private partnership that comes together under Title 33 and Chapter 46 to be Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council network. And that is the primary mechanism to advise the governor and the legislature on the well-being of kids and families prenatal to age 8. And our primary mission is to improve the well-being of children and families in Vermont using evidence and data to inform policy and really bringing voices and partners together to discuss critical challenges and problem solve. And what's really exciting about that model is that we serve as this backbone for collective impact for kids and families. We hold the vision and strategic plan for the early childhood system. And when we say early childhood, we really mean all of the different sectors, resources, services, and supports that are there and need to be in place to support the well-being of kids and families. So it may be early care and education, early intervention, Head Start, nutrition, mental health, substance abuse, early childhood and after school summer care. And what's really exciting is that we've seen partners across so many of these sectors involved in BBF's efforts to think about how we're supporting families impacted by substance abuse disorder. And specifically seeing really strong partnerships emerge in the early childhood arena and related to adult treatment service systems. So for those of you who aren't as aware of the overall network and our infrastructure at Building Bright Futures, we often talk about it as having kind of 3 tiers of a network. We have 12 regional councils that touch every corner of the state. So there are regional managers who support bringing folks together, the experts on the ground who are working with families, who are families, and really identifying what those needs and challenges are in every corner of the state. We also have 7 strategic plan committees that are monitoring how we're making progress towards the goals we've articulated for Vermont's early childhood system. And we have a state advisory council, which is 23 governor appointed members that includes legislators from both the Senate and the House. It includes public partners from agencies representing and working to support kids and families. And it includes private sector partners. It may be childcare directors, early childhood educators, folks working in the nutrition space, advocacy partners, private philanthropic partners, and family members. So across this network, it represents over 450 individuals over 28 sectors who are really thinking about how we support kids and families. And the way that we support our key roles in this system are a multitude. Some of those are by compiling and providing evidence and data and serving as a key resource to decision makers, whether it's the governor, the legislature, but decision makers across our sector, and using evidence and really making sure that they have the information and data. It does not always mean a number, but the voices and the stories of those with lived experience to help inform decision making. And so some of the ways we do that is through our regional councils, or by hosting forums, discussions, using survey data to really capture those perspectives. It also looks like bringing experts together and thinking about how we're prioritizing and strategizing to actually meet the needs of kids and families. And one of the really key roles that we've been prioritizing in this last couple of years is elevating the voice of families and communities and educators and providers and those working with families. And our job at the end of the day is to take all of that information, synthesize it, and elevate it up to make sure that when decisions are being made about how to support kids and families, that those decision makers have that information. So in thinking about Building Bright Futures' role for today's session, it's part of a 4-year project that we've called the Substance Use Disorder Making Systems Work for Families. And this is a project that was funded by the UVM Medical Center's Community Health Improvement Committee. And again, in thinking about our key charges and really listening to families and those who are working with families, we've been able to understand where there are gaps in the system and where there are major unmet needs and where we've seen inequitable abilities to access services for a range of reasons. Our regional councils are absolutely critical to setting those priorities. And this project was really born out of some awareness around the children and families in the communities that were impacted by substance use disorder, specifically in the Chittenden Regional Council. So shout out to all of my regional council partners in Chittenden who really sparked some of this work and really identified that we were lacking ways for supporting children and families through treatment and recovery. So our family and regional council partners came together and identified a serious need to increase coordination and the services for families impacted by substance use disorder, originally starting and originating in Chittenden County, but then expanding to Grand Isle counties. There was a lot of discussion around COVID's impact and how kids and families are struggling, and that relationship building is key but challenging in this virtual space, that there's an increased need for data tracking, and that family voice, among all other things, is critical to informing our ability to develop strategies, to know what's working well and where support is needed. So the goal for that project was to create a more integrated, coordinated system for kids and families that are really struggling with substance use disorder, and to think about how we are looking across all of the different entities that are providing resources and support to families and building seamless systems for them. We also recognized that this is so complicated, and the severity of the systems and the interplay of these systems that impact substance use disorder are significantly challenging families' abilities to access services. And we really need to be thinking about this continuum and seamless access to services. So we've really benefited from some serious continued leadership in the community of practice in both Chittenden County and Grand Isle, have brought together so many of the child serving agencies and organizations to improve that collaboration, to provide some wraparound supports for families and children impacted by substance disorder. So going back to some of the BBF's key charges, the piece that I have truly loved about this project is focusing on empower. How are we empowering families and communities and elevating the voices of those with lived experience and bringing experts together? So today's session is about that. It's about empowering families. It's about bringing together families with lived experience and reminding everyone that you all are the experts. And it's really about our ability to convene this group, to elevate the successes and to elevate the challenges that are faced, so that we can think about how we build this collective system and navigate moving forward. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm really honored to be a part of this work, and I'm so proud, not just of the Building Bright Futures team, but the entire community in Vermont for coming together on this issue. So thank you, and I'll transition it back to Kristen.
Great, thank you, Dr. Crossman. So our keynote speaker today is Grace Keller, and Grace is the program coordinator of Safe Recovery, which is a program of the Howard Center and is Vermont's oldest and largest syringe service program. Grace is a leading harm reduction expert and advocate. Grace?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As Kristen said, I'm Grace Keller. I'm the program coordinator at Howard Center Safe Recovery. Safe Recovery is Vermont's oldest and largest syringe service program. We have about 5,000 members, and we have members from every county in the state. So we're a statewide organization. And I don't know if people know much about harm reduction. It really supports people to stay safe and give people a menu of options to stay safe while they're using. And it also gives people options if they're ready for treatment. And at our office, we have treatment on demand. People who utilize a syringe service program are 5 times more likely to enter treatment than those who don't. And we have a very unique relationship to the client population, especially because with harm reduction, there's no judgment. It's really about supporting clients. It's not about anything punitive. So people really feel safe to tell us what's going on. One of the things I'll talk about today a little bit, which I don't usually share, is that the reason I got into this work is because my mother struggled with drug use for a long time. And as a child who experienced that, I feel like my role was to simply bear witness, and I really didn't have any power in that situation. And but yet I was living it day to day. And I think one of the things that I'm hopeful about the way we're looking at substance use disorder now is that we realize that children aren't just bearing witness, that they have power and that they should be empowered in these situations in certain ways. And I know that seems probably radical to some of you all, but if you've experienced it yourself, you know that the kids are already doing things that are beyond their scope. They're already assisting in ways that are scary to them. So working on, giving them more of a voice, more of an idea of what's safe and how to help. I can tell you that Bernie Sanders organized a program up at Burlington High School a couple of years ago. And we were doing Narcan trainings, and some of the kids were just there checking out and seeing what it was. But you could look through the eyes of some of these children who have tried to wake up their mom or dad and not been able to, or tried to wake up their sibling and not been able to, and really wanting to hear word for word what we were saying. And so you think about these kids in the position they're in, and they're already in that position, and they want to be with their parent, and they want things to be safe, and they want to be empowered to know what it looks like when you do call 911 and how to do those kind of things. And so that's one of the perspectives that I'm coming from today, is that, just sort of bearing witness and being party to it all, but not having a voice in it and not having tools is not really what we should be doing for our kids. The other thing I can say is that we've lost so many people to fatal overdose. And I sit on the front lines of that. A lot of the times I know people who've died of overdose. I know their family, and many times I know their kids. I've gone to grandparents' day with clients' kids who didn't have anybody to go with them. Like, I know families. And what I can tell you is the top thing we could be doing for kids is keeping their parents alive. So I really, really appreciate all of you and having your voices and all the work you're doing. And I appreciate really you all being involved in the overdose prevention efforts, because that's really what kids need, is their parents alive. Children losing their parent for any reason is very, very, very traumatizing. Children losing their parent to drug use is very much more significantly impactful in many ways. And so we really can all work together on that common goal of having kids, even parents who aren't in custody of them, making sure that they have parents that can stay alive. And I think we're talking about a very dangerous drug market right now. The 93% of the people who died last year in Vermont died of had fentanyl involved in their system. Very few had heroin involved in their system, less than 10%. So what that tells us is we have a very, very powerful drug market, and we're losing more Vermonters every day. And oftentimes, more often than not, their parents, at least the ones that I know. So I think really looking at this, stripping down the stigma, pulling it apart and looking at what it is, and children are facing their parents' diseases, children are facing their parents' mortality, and really getting to the heart of those things and building up from there. And that's why I'm really glad that you all invited me here today. I would have loved to have a message of hope, but I'm having a message of a sense of urgency right now. And I think we have more hopeful messages coming after me, because I think the other really important thing that we can be doing is listening to people with lived experience. And that doesn't mean just people in recovery. That means people who are living it right now. I believe there's an acuity that we're dealing with in the system that is more severe than it's ever been. And it's not just substance use, it's homelessness, it's domestic violence, it's the risk level. I've been at my job for 14 years and I've never seen the situation that we're looking at right now. And people are doing their part. Our clients are doing their part. They're reaching out, they're getting help. But the system needs to meet them there too. Recently, about a year ago, I had a client come in to tell me that they've been doing well. And I said, I haven't seen you. And they're like, oh, well, I've been in the clinic for a year and I've been not using. And I said, well, did you get housed? Because we were working on getting them housed. And there was a couple, and they were like, no, we're living in a tent. And you think of somebody getting out of a tent in February and walking to get treatment every single day. That's resilience that we don't have. So I think the other way to honor people in this situation is really embracing and recognizing the resilience. I have never slept in a tent in Vermont in February, and I don't know what it would be like, but I can tell you that the first thought of me in the morning wouldn't be to get up, get myself to treatment, walk miles to get there, and also then go to work. And that's the situation we also have people in, is that the housing situation is really, really desperate. So what I can say is that we have really great treatments at our office. We have treatment on demand, where if people decide they want help, they can get it the same day. Started that program with Kim Blake, which on my screen is 2 blocks over. And the hospital also is giving people treatment on demand. And these medications, methadone and buprenorphine, have very, very, very high success rates. And any day that somebody takes buprenorphine is a day that they are protected from a fatal overdose. So our goal is to get people into treatment when they're ready. And instead of having a high bar, we really want to wrap around them and figure out how to get them there, how to keep them there, how to make treatment apply to them, rather than this is a system that you have to fit into. And I think that that's been really successful. So the hope, there are some hopeful messages. We've also distributed 35,000 doses of Narcan out of our office. And Narcan is the medication that reverses overdose. We also do trainings for providers in the community. So if any of your programs want a training, the Department of Health gives us this awesome grant to be able to come and do trainings for Narcan. We do it for clients, we do it for staff. We've done it for kids, and there's a precedent in the country for a lot of programs doing it for kids too. There's obviously a way that we would work that and talk more about that. But I think that, again, kids are bearing witness, and they can be helpful. We think it's a terrifying idea to have a child administer Narcan to their parent, but what's more terrifying is to have a child watch their parent die. And unfortunately, I do know people that that's happened to. So we're not talking 8-year-olds here, but we're talking, high school kids. And again, I'm here to shake things up today, so I'm sure I'm maybe shocking some people, but that's the truth, is that I was a 16-year-old that couldn't wake my mom up on a regular basis. I wasn't, my mom wasn't using fentanyl. This drug is incredibly potent. So that's where I'm at, but I want to stop talking because I know some of the panelists, and they are far more amazing than I am, and far more hopeful than I am. And so I'm going to turn it over to whoever's, to Kristen, I think, who's keeping things moving. But I will also be around, so if there's questions, or might grab me in the chat or email me. Thank you.
Excellent, very moving. Thank you, Grace. Yeah, the thought of waking a parent up is a lot. So, and I think you said this better than I'm about to, but as service providers, concerned community members, family and friends, we can all learn from the experiences of people who've struggled with substance use disorder, and particularly those in recovery. So I'd like to now welcome our panelists who have agreed to share their experiences with us. And so would each of you tell us a little bit about yourselves, including your preferred pronouns, and we'll go alphabetically, starting with Alexis.
Hello, I'm Alexis. I go by she, her. I am in recovery. This year will be coming up soon, 3 years. I am also a parent to an 8-year-old and a 1-year-old boy, an 8-year-old daughter, and a 1-year-old son. Thank you.
Chip, you're next.
Hi, my name is Chip. I am a parent. I'm 3 years in my recovery journey. I use they, them pronouns. I'm happy to be here.
Heidi?
Hi, I'm Heidi Hausler. I prefer she, her pronouns, and I am a single parent of 2 children, and I have 6 years of recovery.
And Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Blake. I'm a Burlington OBGYN. I also have been a treatment provider at Howard Center Safe Recovery. I was lucky enough to have a break from my OBGYN job for a few years and was able to help get the low barrier buprenorphine program up and running there with Grace and folks. But more, the reason I'm here on the panel is I'm mom to Sean Blake, and Sean passed away from an overdose in 2017. He was 27 years old, and I'm here to talk a little bit about some of our family experiences with treatment in Vermont.
Thank you. Lisa? Uh-oh, is Lisa still here?
She is, just didn't have her microphone on.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
My name is Lisa, and I'm a mom who have lost my daughter at age 30 to an intentional overdose of opiates, alcohol, and propranolol. And this was during the pandemic in 2020. And so I'm here to share what it was like to our family in losing her to substance use.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everybody. So we have some prepared questions for the panelists, and if the folks in the audience have clarifying questions that come up while the panelists are speaking, please put them in the chat directed to Scott Pavic. And if we have time in the end, we'll address as many as we can. But for now, let's learn from the panelists. And if it works for all of you, the panelists, we can just keep on going in alphabetical order so there isn't kind of that pause in between as not wanting to step over someone else. So, so the first question is, what was it like for you or your family during your struggle or your child's struggle with substance use disorder? And again, we'll start with Alexis and go down the line.
For my family, it was a huge toll on my immediate family and my close friends as well. They have all told me since the day that I started recovery, they were always waiting for that call, the one where I overdosed. My daughter didn't have her mom from 3 to 6, and even after when I was still recovering. And to this day, I'm coming up this year on 3 years sober, and I'm still mending the broken bridges and heartaches. And as for myself, the darkest, most alone, and just worst days of my life, not ever knowing what that day will bring because of the constantly being put into the dangerous situations I was in. And to this day, I still have PTSD, my apologies, because of my substance abuse disorder.
Chip?
What was it like for me while struggling? I have a now 17-year-old and 19-year-old. So I struggle with alcohol addiction and drug addiction for most of their life. For me, I was so active that I wasn't aware of what I was affecting and who I was affecting. All I knew is I was spending most of my time figuring out how not to let anyone know what was going on with me on the inside. I hid my alcohol. And so my kids saw me drunk. They were the only ones who saw me drunk. And at the end of the day, they're the ones who are putting me to bed. They're the ones smelling my breath. They're the ones wondering if I was going to come home sober or drunk. It was a constant battle with my children to wonder what they were going to get when I came home. And I was an active, I drank and drove. That was where I did most of my hiding, which I know was unsafe, but it was my way of hiding from my family. So my kids would always say, every time I'd say sorry, they just are so sick of me being an alcoholic. They were sick of that being the reason why. And I think today they're still trying to come to terms with how much it might have affected them. But they took care of me most of their life. And when I was trying to be sober, it was a mess. I was constantly up and down with my moods and chasing and figuring out how I'd hide it again. And it was awful for all of us, but I think more awful for my children because I was numb. That was our experience within our home.
Heidi?
Hi. So for me, during my struggle, it was, it lasted for probably about 15 years, and it was really tough. It was hard for myself. I can only imagine what it was like for my parents, for my friends. They didn't know where I would be, who I would be. They didn't know, if they didn't know if I'd be drunk, if I'd be sober, if I'd be high, if I would be sick. I had a little boy during my addiction, at the height of my addiction. And it scares me now to know that I took care of him as an infant during my addiction. I shouldn't have been taking care of anyone. I couldn't take care of myself. The worry that I put my family through, but for myself, I was concerned with using. I was concerned with myself. I was selfish. I didn't care about anyone else. I cared about myself. I cared about, my next fix. I cared about my next, I just couldn't be sick, and I couldn't, with that being said, I also couldn't deal with the feelings of knowing what I was doing to those people. So I just kept it going, and it was a really cruel place to put myself in. And it's, it was just cruel is the best word that I can use for it. And I did it to myself, and knowing I did it to other people is something that I still struggle with on a daily basis, trying to make up for that. And it's been 6 years, and it's still probably the biggest worry that I have, that I think about it all day, every day. So yeah.
Kim?
Hi, yes, for us, as a family, it was a real roller coaster. There were some incredibly great moments. Sean first kind of found sobriety right after he failed his first semester of college. He went to treatment at day one, and he did really well. And I think as a family, we kind of really all rallied behind him. And Sean went into the Navy, and I think in retrospect, he probably still had a lot of unresolved issues, but it was just such a huge highlight for our family to see him be so proud of himself, to finish basic training and to finish submarine training. He was just super excited. And kind of likewise, a few years later, after his addiction took him to an even darker place, Sean went to treatment, long-term treatment in California. And I just have this incredible reminder of just one of the most wonderful holidays that we've ever had, which was in a Thanksgiving dinner in a treatment center. And, just a bunch of kids, 20, 25-year-old kids, and our family and their families. And we just, all shared a couple turkey dinners. And it was just, we just had this feeling, or just like, oh, that was a rough patch and it's behind us. And that contrasted with some of the really deep lows. At one point during, Sean's addiction, he was missing. He was missing for several months. We knew that he was in New York City somewhere, and we were trying to find him, but we didn't know where he was. And I didn't hear from him for a whole month. And that was probably like the worst, just the not knowing, just thinking that he might have died and we would never know. It was the hardest part. All of that, of course, pales to him actually dying, which is a whole nother realm of difficulty. And part of one of the things that I do in the community is I work with parents who've lost kids, a group called Team Sharing. And the trauma of losing, your child, it is unmanageable. unimaginable, and there aren't really words to describe it. But every time we have a new member, it's a heartache, and it is, as Grace said, if we can keep people alive, they can find recovery, or at least stay alive enough to potentially want it.
Lisa?
Thanks, Kim. I'm Lisa. It was like being on an emotional roller coaster, really. No, not one family member was able to control her use, and all methods were attempted, tough love, not enabling, by giving her cash, and especially showing love and concern. It was just a feeling of total powerlessness. She had multiple hospitalizations for alcohol rehab and mental health issues. She had a couple DUIs at a very young age, and one night in jail during her college years for mouthing off at a police officer at a party. Had to spend the night in jail. So she would become sober for different lengths of time and then fall back to using. And during the times when she was sober, we were, hopeful. And during the pandemic, communication was all done long distance. And at the end, prior to her death, it was extremely difficult and isolating for all of us. And she had an overdose attempt in March of 2020 and almost lost her life there, and actually miraculously came out of it pretty much unharmed, except for some kidney damage. But in July 2020, she had gone back to work. She had been probably, she was working, and hopefully I thought she was sober. And the last week of her life, she texted me every day, really nice pictures of her with her animals at the vet clinic. And I told her that you're making my day. So I think it was her way of saying goodbye. And she had a high level of energy during that time. And that's the danger time for when someone's gonna have the energy to commit, take their own life. So that's what it was like for us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody. So the next question that we have prepared is, how did substance use affect your day-to-day life? Either your personal substance abuse or your family member's substance use. Did it affect employment, relationships, and things like that? And again, we'll start with Alexis.
So at first, in the beginning, I was using opiates like pills, and I was very convinced that I was hiding it very well. So every day it would be, I would need more and more and more. But then when an event happened in 2017, my brother was killed. I lost myself and was introduced to the more hardcore drugs like heroin and crack cocaine. And when that happened, it was just the quickest way to go down this never-ending spiral until I was at the point of, I was living behind a dumpster, not seeing, obviously, my daughter, because I pulled away from her when things got to the point of like using heroin and stuff, because I couldn't be around her like that. But in the beginning, when I first started using, I was working, and then I lost my job that I was at for 5+ years. Ended up getting 2 DUIs back to back, which then there goes my driving privileges. So it affected me in a lot of ways. And towards the end, there was always a part of me that wanted, because of my children and for myself, I wanted to get better. I always did. And one of the biggest things when you're using is if you don't use, you get really sick. And for me, that was hard. That caused me to use longer, and because I didn't know who, where, and how to get help. And so once I was able to obviously find the who, what, when, with the who, where, and how, things changed. But that was what it was like for me during my substance use.
How did substance use affect me? I think the longer I stay sober, my story changes. I think when I was in active use and drinking, I wasn't aware of how much my day-to-day life was affecting me. I went to my first rehab when I was 19. I was just partying. I thought I was just, a partier. And the more it progressed over my life, it started to kind of control me. And I thought, so the job for me every day was to just control it and to make sure that nobody noticed it. And what I thought while I was actively using, I didn't think that anyone else noticed it. And I look back and now I did lose a job for taking money, but I managed to lie and convince myself that I didn't lose the job, that I left the job. So when you're in active use and alcoholism, you just go to the next, like some bad things happen, and I just continued using. So I wasn't really aware of how it was affecting me until it really started to control me, when I became a morning drinker, and I couldn't just have a drink in the morning to calm the nerves. I needed to have more and more and more and more. And that was when the real day-to-day tasks affected me, because it was just a constant battle of trying to figure out, how is nobody going to find out about this? I'm an athlete, I'm a parent. Let me see if I can make my life look financially stable. Let me get the car I can afford so I look good. So it was all about me really trying to present myself in a way. And that alone, on top of having this alcohol addiction, throwing up on the side of the road and trying to get alcohol in me at the same time, to not die, that's where it started to really progress. And even then, when I was in it, I didn't realize I could be sick in the toilet trying to get alcohol in to keep my body functioning, and not realize it was an issue. I still was able to convince myself how great I was. And I'll put a Facebook post out there and I'll let people know, so I look good, and I'll drive the car I can't afford that I'm going to get repoed. That was the struggle of trying to look right and trying to deal with this in just drug of alcohol that was eating me from the inside out. So what I thought I was doing wasn't great. I'm a business owner. I had clients who were seeing me drunk. I was trying to switch alcohol so it wouldn't smell, but I didn't lose my business over it, but I lost a lot of other stuff over it. And so it was a daily struggle to try to look like I fit in. That's my story.
For me, how substance use affected my day-to-day life. For a long time, I had fooled people. I fooled a lot of people. I would, be addicted to opiates. I would buy, Suboxone on the street, and I would keep that up until I couldn't, and I detoxed myself many times, countless times. And, I was able to graduate college. I was able to do a lot of things until I wasn't. you know, I went through my whole first pregnancy without my doctors knowing I was addicted to opiates, not knowing that I was doing large amounts of cocaine. And I hid that, and that's a shame I have to live with. But no one knew because for whatever reason, I was able to keep it together. And it wasn't until after the birth of my son where I really couldn't do it anymore. That's when I really went downhill. I lost my house. I lost my fiance. I lost my son. I lost everything. I lost my parents. I lost my brothers, my sisters. I lost my friends. And I wasn't working. Well, no, I was working. I had gotten fired from a couple jobs because no one wants to work with someone when they're messed up all the time. They never knew, you know, if I was high or if I'd be running around like crazy or if I'd be in the bathroom sick. That's just, I was unstable. My emotional health was terrible, to say the least. So it affected literally everything, every aspect of my life, but I still chose it. And I chose it until I didn't choose it, because ultimately I knew I didn't want that lifestyle, but it took me losing everything to give me the courage to stand up to it and to say, I can't do this anymore. But that was a long 15 years of active addiction and losing it all.
Kim?
So, you know, for me, the difficulty was day to day was I didn't talk much about it, and I didn't know where to find support. The few times that I had mentioned it, I had confided to someone at work about our situation because this person, I knew that they had a family member in recovery and I thought they would be understanding. And the person then turned around and said to a colleague of mine, you know, when I wasn't present, something to the lines of like, well, you know, you're a successful parent if your child's not an opiate addict. And that, you know, got back to me. And so it just, I really didn't say much about it to people. And I think that really hindered my recovery from codependency, shall we say. I found Al-Anon, which is an incredibly helpful support. I think they do still, I feel like, have a little too much of a tough love approach. But I also found the NAMI parent group, family support group, which still meets in Burlington twice monthly. And that also was very helpful and had what I would say is just what you needed, which was concrete support and guidance as, you know, where to go for treatment, where to go for support for yourself. And I felt like those resources were really lacking for, you know, it was hard enough to find treatment for Sean, but it was really hard to find treatment for health for us as a family. We did luckily have the privilege of going to 2 family programs, which were incredibly helpful to, you know, as I said, just to recover from the codependency.
Thanks, Kim. As a parent, what was it like? I lived in constant worry for her, and I felt on the edge of impending doom. I wished I had gone to Al-Anon, but I didn't. I didn't really know that that was available. That would have given me some support. But I did go to individual counseling, and got some tools for coping, and it was hard because my daughter at the time, most of the time of her real advanced addiction was out of state. She went to college out of state, and then moved to another state out west. So it was a situation for me. Again, I felt powerless, and this kid we had a lot of, high expectations. She was very academically, high academics, and during the teenage years, it was the mental illness came through, and as well as the substance use. So it was hard. It was really hard. That's my story.
And so what led to yours or your loved one's decision to seek support or access recovery and treatment? And was there a particular person or a group of people that supported you or them? And if so, how was that support given?
So in 2019, during my addiction, I ended up becoming pregnant, and I used drugs the entire pregnancy, did not get any help, didn't seek any prenatal care. And so I had no idea when the baby would come, and the baby came, and the baby was born. It was a little girl. And when I saw my daughter versus being pregnant and continuously getting high and trying to ignore the situation, seeing her really, I was at the lowest of my low, and doing stuff to myself is one thing, but to a baby that is completely helpless, that was a huge wake-up call for me. And at that time, my sister she still is, as a social worker with Connections, and I'm not sure if I would have been able to get the help the way I did if it wasn't for my sister and her connections. But I gave birth in May, and beginning of June, I was in rehab. And between giving birth in the middle of May and going to rehab, I actually went to Safe Recovery, and that was the start of what is now a great life where I'm sober. But that was what led to it ultimately, and why I'm speaking today.
Okay, what led me to, or my family? It's been a journey. I'm 40. Well, I got sober at 39. So I was in my first rehab at 19. My kids experienced one of my trips and I did stay sober for about a year after leaving Maple Leaf Farms in Vermont. But honestly, I think I got a cancer diagnosis, and I kept drinking. I think no matter what, I had to ultimately surrender myself, and be ready. I think often loved ones really want to do everything they can, but my parents had an intervention, and then my ex-husband showed up, and everyone's showing up at the house. It was the most embarrassing moment of my entire life. And I ran that much further. I'm not blaming them, because I know they're just doing what they can, because I can imagine having a child watching a child suffer with addiction. But ultimately, not even a cancer diagnosis stopped my addiction. My children did have an impact, though. I will say that 3 months after my cancer diagnosis, I was out running and drinking and surviving. And she had just said to me, like I said before, is I'm just so sick of the reason I have to keep forgiving you is because you're an alcoholic. And I cried. I don't know what it was in that moment, but I heard what she said, and I'm sure she said it many times. But I think I just was willing to stop fighting. And we were all kind of sitting in our kitchen, me and my two daughters, and crying. And I just kind of just said, I'll do whatever it takes. But ultimately, I had to surrender for myself, and I had to do the work, and I had to make that decision. I couldn't do for my children. I had to do for myself first. And so I think with the support of my two kids, they definitely were there for me. But ultimately, an addict has to make the decision. So many people tried to make it for me. And I just was at my bottom, so to speak, but I'm sure there's many more, and I don't want to find out. Thank you.
For me, what led to my decision to get to find recovery, the most recent one, 6 years ago, was when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. She, I had tried to access, getting into programs, but my addictions weren't severe enough, I was told. And that to find like a Suboxone or a methadone program, I don't know if I was too high functioning or what it was, but I was told that my addictions weren't severe enough. So when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I was able to get into a program. And because I was pregnant, I was bumped up to the front of the line, I guess, for the wait list. And I knew I had known for a while that I wanted to stop, but I needed this, not just like an MAT program, but I needed something bigger than myself to find the strength for my recovery, I guess. And the thought of doing to my daughter what I did to my first child, I couldn't do it. I wasn't willing to do that. And I needed to be able to give her the best life that she could possibly have. And like Alexis said, it's a little helpless baby and you don't want to do anything like it's out of their control. It's in your control. And that's what did it for me. Thanks.
I would say, for us as a family, when Sean really kind of was at his most committed to recovery was when he had a bottom that, really moved him. For us as a family, I will say that the months before he died, we had kind of, I guess we had reached I want to say a plateau in kind of our constant need for him to be in treatment. Sean was in treatment, I think 13 times. But I was visiting him one time and he was in jail. He was at the St. J work camp. And I went to go see him. And I was once again giving him my pitch about, this place he'd been to in California. They offered him to go there for free for a whole year. Sean was a cook. He was a chef. And they said that he could come out there and work. He could, cook for the treatment center, and that would pay for his treatment. It would be, it wouldn't cost him any money. And, I'm pitching this like, any episode of Intervention. And that's what he said to me. He says, Mom, I just, maybe I'll go after the summer. He said, maybe I'll go later, but I don't want this to be another episode of Intervention. So I stopped, and, I didn't completely stop. In fact, the week before he passed away, I tried to bring him to Brattleboro. I was giving him a ride to work, and he was teary on the way to work, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he says, "Well, it's just so hard sometimes." And I was like, "Well, let's just keep going. You don't have to go to work. You can get another job. We just go to Brattleboro." He really liked Brattleboro for some reason. And he said, no, I just got this job. I want to keep going. But I felt like, in the weeks before he died, we had a sense of peace that I'm just really grateful we had. It's not that it made it any easier, but it definitely took a little bit of the edge off when I started to realize that the only person I was going to be able to convince to be healthy was myself, and not, I wasn't going to be able to make him go to treatment or get well for him.
You're muted, Lisa.
Okay. What led to her decision to seek support or access recovery or treatment? Initially, she got a DWI in high school, and I, confronted her with it and offered to take her to AA. And we did go to some AA meetings together. And that was somewhat helpful. But she got married to a guy in the Air Force, and he had to go on missions over in Dubai. And during those times, she would relapse and just go on binges for days. And so he was a motivator for her at that time. He threatened, after multiple times of doing the same thing over and over, he threatened to leave her if she didn't seek help. So I also wrote plenty of letters in my lifetime to her, and I still keep those. And, just saying, we're worth it. You can do this. But unfortunately, the outcome wasn't good.
And so along the same lines of seeking treatment, seeking recovery, what was your experience or your child's experience that you know about in seeking recovery or treatment services, and particularly what barriers did they face or you face?
So before the ending where my sister and her connections helped me, before that, I had been for, at least a good year and a half, many months in that time, nonstop wanting to seek help and get help. And a big thing was there was wait lists to be on, the MAT program. And, you have to have specific qualifications. And I also was terrified too, of, being pregnant. And I felt so hopeless because I'm already in, deep, and it was just in terror and fear because of that. But my point is, I had many different times tried finding help, and, the clinic for some people was an option, but for me, it was not the right option for me. And I think the other thing for myself was, the stigma that could be behind I was just fear around being an addict. And, for a very long time, I was hiding it and thought I was hiding it, which I was doing a really bad job at it. But when I finally was able to find Safe Recovery and their, harm reduction model really helped me. The way that Safe Recovery and the workers there, they know they were so kind, and, and if you came in, like in the beginning, I wasn't sober right coming out of rehab. And I would have, dirty UAs and stuff. But the way that it's okay, we can get through this together, not they're going to discipline you for it and take things away. So that really helped me, believe it or not, get through and, want to get through and not feel hopeless. So that was what helped me.
For me, what do I use for support? For the first couple of years, and especially the first year, I heavily used the AA program, more out of a promise to my children, I think. And if they knew I was there, it made them feel good. But surrounding myself with a community of people who are similar. I like to go to a lot of speaker meetings because I could hear people's stories and feel like, oh, okay, like your thinking is like mine. Oh, okay, you did this stuff too that I would never admit. Having a sponsor who would support me. I didn't get super active because I just don't feel safe in a lot of places, or I didn't, especially early on. But putting down the substance is just the beginning, and then the work is really, that's when the work really starts, because you face everything and all the demons that brought you to where you were. So for me, I also go to therapy every week, and I have actually another therapist I see once a month with the more in-depth stuff. I stay out of places that may trigger me, but my car was my biggest trigger because that was where I hid, and so I had to really just keep being honest and keep those close to me, which is a very, very small group of people. And keep hearing stories like today. Someone had asked in the chat, why am I here? It's so I can hear these stories, and it's quite moving and hard in a way to hear people who have lost someone just like me. And that's why I do this, is to remind me that I can't go back out, because my using career isn't over yet, and I don't really want to. So just keeping it as the number one priority every day.
I can relate to a lot of what Chip just said. Keeping it fresh in your brain, to know like what could happen if you do decide to use. But also, for me, my children are a huge part of my recovery. They always have been. I was just 8 months in recovery when my daughter was born, so I was really busy. I also had a 4-year-old little boy that I was taking care of. I did group therapy. I did weekly one-on-one therapy sessions. EMDR therapy is really helpful for me as well, extremely helpful. And really immersing myself in the community to finding people who are in recovery is really powerful, knowing that I'm not alone in this. There's just as many people that are like me than are not like me, honestly. And that we have, we don't have the same story, but there's a bond, and kind of an unspoken bond, that we can relate to each other. I'm also I chose to work in the recovery community, so being able to offer support to other parents is really powerful for me. It reminds me on a daily basis why I chose recovery. And, if my wisdom can offer just one person some hope, it's worth it for me.
So some of the things, that have helped me a lot since Sean passed away, particularly, I've been involved with Team Sharing, which is a support group for parents who've lost kids, or it's also a group for siblings. But that has helped me a lot to help people through the kind of early stages of grief. I remember it really vividly. You just see how people do, where it starts off as being like, it's everything, the grief, it's everything. But then, the death instead of taking out a whole family, people sometimes do find a way to, I don't want to say ever come to terms with it, but it takes a little bit less of a space in your daily life. And it's nice to see that. It's nice to see we've done some events where we've had posters of our kids, and to see somebody just be so happy to see the poster, which, I mean, it's hard to explain to make it sound like, but sometimes just spending a few hours with the poster, it's like you're spending a couple hours with your kid that you didn't get a chance to, say something to them or be with them. So that's been very meaningful. I think it's hard to put into words how great it was working at Safe Recovery, and I still see MAT patients at Women's at UVM, but it's incredibly gratifying. And I would say that if you have the opportunity to work with people, it pays back 100-fold, especially, when you see Alexis thriving, and it's just, and it oftentimes is just a fast track to a beautiful life. It's pretty amazing. So I'm really grateful for that, for sure. I probably never would have had that opportunity if this hadn't happened to us.
Thanks, Kim. I too, as a mom who's lost someone to substance use, I belong to the same group as Kim of parents who have lost kids and from substance use. And I find it very therapeutic. I find it very, very helpful to have relationships with moms who have gone through the same thing, and use them as role models sometimes on how to, feel the loss, but yet have some peace with it, and know that, our loved ones are at peace now and not suffering anymore. So I also recommend the poster project that we've participated in. It's called Today I Matter, and it's national now, started by parents who have lost a son to substance use, and as a way to make it public aware of the numbers of kids that have died from substance use. He makes these large posters of our kids' faces, and then we put a word about them and their name and what town they were from. And like Kim said, it was very comforting for me to spend time with Shauna, and I was very proud of the poster, and it just was an unexplainable emotion, but I think it was really helpful to make people aware that how many of these kids we've lost, so I try and educate other parents about substance use and try to have tips on hand if they're going through it with their child, currently using, to really be open about it. And it helps to talk to other people, other parents. That's all.
Great. Thank you for sharing what supports your recovery and what supports your process in dealing with your losses and experiences in your life. I think you also already talked about things that you do to support other people in recovery. I'm wondering if anyone wants to say more about barriers they might have faced, particularly those who are in recovery themselves, barriers you might have faced finding recovery. Alexis sort of mentioned stigma being a barrier and the harm reduction model being a way that helped support her her process to get into recovery, and combine it with a question in the chat about, is there something that someone could have done that might have helped you get into recovery sooner? So reduced a barrier to get into recovery sooner. So Chip and Heidi particularly, do you want to answer barriers that you face getting into recovery, and if there's something that might have helped you get in there sooner?
That's a great question. In addition to my alcohol use, I was also hiding my gender identity. And so the more we love everybody, the more we all can be seen and not hide. Barriers of education as a child about things. Again, I think using is just one reason to hide and to numb. And I was of sexual abuse in my perfect home, and it just led me to so many different areas of my life that needed to numb. So holding your children and the little ones and educating at a younger age, I don't know what would have changed, because being in recovery is really hard as well. So yeah, that's a tough question. That's all I got.
I know for myself personally, the times that I did attempt recovery and I wasn't successful, some of those barriers aren't there anymore. There's more access to MAT programs that can kind of get you started in the right direction. I know it's not, like a magic pill or anything, but it gives you a leg to stand on until you can figure out what you need for support. And because I was told that there was my issues weren't severe enough, that I still have a place to live, I still have this, I still have that. But with that being said, also with stigmas, I think taking part of like a panel like this is breaking down barriers for people, because there is stigma. There's stigma at my doctor's office that I go to. I just experienced it last week at the dentist when they looked at my meds that I take. So just the more awareness that people have about what substance use disorder is and what it is not, I think can be a really powerful thing for people to learn.
Great. And so do you have any messages for people who are currently struggling with substance use disorder, or for providers who want to help people with substance use disorder? Alexis, do you want to start?
Yep, sorry about that. For others also struggling with substance use disorder, I'd like to say it is possible. I never thought for myself that I could be where I am today, not even 3 years in recovery technically yet. So I bought my first home, well, a mortgage on a home, and I never thought I'd do that in a lifetime. And here I am, not even 3 years in recovery, and it has everything to do with the who, and the how, and the where. So everyone that's helped me through my recovery. And when you're struggling in recovery, in active recovery, your active addiction, your mindset's very different. You're very hopeless. So in the moment, it's hard. It's harder when you're not where I am currently today to see the light at the end of the tunnel, per se, to see where I am today. So my message is for the ones that are currently struggling, that you can totally get here. And for the doctors and anyone else that have been helping people get to recovery. Never will I ever be able to thank all of you enough for everything that you all do. You have given my daughter her mom back. You have given my sister and my dad and mom their daughter and sister back. And the list can just keep going on and on, all of the things and people that have been affected by now my recovery, not just my addiction. So thank you.
A message, so many messages to people who are struggling. I think, you know, I work in the recovery with people in recovery as well. And just to know that every relapse or every time you fall and you get back up, it's just one more, you know, one more strength. What, I don't know what I'm saying. One more step closer to staying sober or staying in recovery, and giving people unconditional love each time they fall is so important. Feeling seen at your worst and at your best and is so important. Meeting people where they're at, no matter where they're at, if they're, you know, needing another pill or another, you know, dose or another drink to survive, just being there for them is just so important. And to providers out there, I think for me, as someone who hid so much that maybe a lot of you may have not been able to see my struggle, and from a child, and I looked like I came from a perfect family. And I looked like life was great, and I was an athlete, and I had everything going for me, and I was awful. And so never take what you see on the outside in someone, what's going on in the struggle on the inside. Leading cause of so many addictions and stuff is abuse, neglect, rejection, seeing a child or your parents struggle, all that stuff that a child is doing, and then they find a substance. The minute I found the substance, I found home, and then it slowly tried to kill me. We need to educate children. We need to be there for the children, and then hold those who are in active addiction right now with right where they're at. And yeah, that's it.
Hi, I would like to say, you know, for people who are in addiction, you know, similar to what Alexis and Chip have already said, you know, that there is possibility, there is life after addiction, there's life in recovery, and it can be a really good life in recovery. It's hard, it's draining, it's, you know, but the thing is that you're capable of more than you know, and you deserve, another thing is like you deserve to have it, you deserve to have a good life, and you deserve to be happy and to be fulfilled. And then for providers, well, first of all, thank you all for what you do. But something that I've heard from many people is to just listen, really sit down, take the time, look into whomever you're speaking to's eyes, take it for, you know, just take the minute to really listen to what they're saying. Don't brush it off, don't generalize, just really just listen. And that can go a long way with people. Thanks.
I'll just, you know, share one of my interests in, you know, becoming an MAT provider was I felt a lot of stigma against MAT that our son encountered. Sean really hid his opiate use, I think, because of stigma. And I still feel really badly that he felt that he had to hide it. He often said, I'm done with that. I'm never going back to that. That's, you know, something that's a thing in my past, and it wasn't true. But I know the center that I talked about, where we had the nice Thanksgiving dinner and it was so lovely, that treatment center was a very big 12-step oriented treatment center. And I think that's a great model for alcoholism, but it's not so great with opiate use disorder. And of the 20 some kids that were there that day, 13 were boys, young men, and 6 of them have passed away. So it was a very abstinence-based program. And I think Sean took that to heart to a certain degree. And I feel like a lot of his relapses and struggles would have been prevented if he'd not had stigma about MAT, and if he'd had, you know, like Safe Recovery gives, a warm hug when you need it, and a sense that, you know, a relapse isn't the the end of the world. It's just a stumbling block. And anyhow, I really feel that there needs to be less stigma about using medication-assisted treatment.
Thanks, Kim. Stigma, that's a big word. And there's a lot of stigma among families of kids who are using, or also stigma against mental illness. It's not talked about enough. I try and be pretty open and honest when I meet people and we start talking. You know, I'm not ashamed to tell them about, you know, the story of my daughter and what it was like. And I think it's very important to talk to people about mental illness and drug use and alcohol use. And for the physicians, the primary care physicians, my advice is please try to put your personal beliefs about addiction aside and develop a trusting relationship through showing sincerity and taking time listening to your patients, and to become, you know, educated on the new treatments and modalities such as, you know, the MAT and Safe Recovery, and as well as recommending the tried and true AA program. I hear that that's not suggested a lot of times by physicians when it really should be, because it's a great program.
Great. Wow. So thank you all for sharing your story. We are just about at time. I realize there's one question that we didn't get to from the chat. And so if one or two of you, Chip already touched on this a little bit, but if one or two of you want to talk about maybe about the roots or the origins of your substance use disorder, or your child's substance use disorder, if one or two of you want to talk about that, it's entirely up to you. Alexis, do you want to say something?
Sure. So I had a pretty tough childhood. Multiple family members had done things to me, sexually assaulted me numerous times and ways. And then I had some pretty severe depression and a very unstable parent, my mom, who now is going through some substance abuse of her own currently. So it's kind of now a reverse role that we're playing. So that was kind of where my childhood was, and then led me to I was pretty rebellious during my teenage years, which then is how I discovered what drugs actually were. And then that's what led to my substance use in the beginning. Was kind of very shaky on edge upbringing, and then a tragedy with my brother dying, which that was what brought the heroin and more powerful drugs on. But it was, and to this day I can remember it, and it replays in my head. My mom, she found out my brother died, and I was right near her, and she knew this, and she said, why couldn't God have taken Alexis or Sam, my sister, instead? And it was that in that moment, it's kind of when my whole world shifted. And then I started using pretty drastically. But there was always this inner piece of me that wanted to get out. And it was that little fire that was ignited, and why I'm sober, because I wanted to get sober. Thank you.
Wow, thanks for sharing.
I can share a little bit. For me, I grew up in a military family, and my father was gone a majority of my life. And I was raised to not cry about it. If I miss my dad, don't tell him because it's gonna make him feel bad. So there's, abandonment. There was sexual assault that happened. And then I think with a combination of both those things with my dad and, being assaulted, my mental health wasn't where it should have been. It was unaddressed. And when I discovered drugs and alcohol, I liked the way it made me feel. And it was downhill from there. I think if my mental health had been addressed at an earlier age, then my life it could have been a lot different. But, yeah.
Thank you. So I think it's really important to note, as someone who works in prevention, that a lot of times it's these early things. We talk a lot about, using substances and willpower and stuff like that. And usually a lot of the interventions are really about helping people cope, or, treatment for mental health or family systems and things like that. So that's a really important message. Thank you for sharing. So I hope the audience learned a few things from the panelists today. We hope you saw ways that you can be support to someone who might be struggling with substance use disorder, and their children and their families. And thank you for joining us. Thank you again for the panelists for sharing your experiences and your story. And everyone should receive an email shortly, or maybe tomorrow, I think, Ali, with a short evaluation. We'd appreciate your feedback. So thank you very much, everybody.